All right, everybody. Hi, and welcome to the December 2021 Gio Community Call. Today, we're going to get some project updates. Then Clayton Craft is going to walk us through a postmarketOS installer that he's been building on Gio. And then we're going to get to talk about the gio-v component library. I'm going to turn things over to Elias to talk about what he's been doing.
Thank you, Chris. I've mostly been working on the accessibility support for Gio. I've implemented, I believe if you were added to the mailing list, you've probably seen my announcement. But in the very short summary is that there is all the base work for it is done, which more or less consists of mapping the immediate mode API of the immediate mode way you use the Gio APIs to the retained mode way to represent accessibility semantic information in accessibility APIs on, for example, Android. And what I mean by that is that since all other toolkits, or most other toolkits, are more or less uniformly described as a graph or a tree, more likely, of widgets. So you have the container here at the top of the tree, and then you have as leaves whatever is inside the container, and or more nodes if you have several other containers. It's sort of like the DOM for a browser, or just the widget tree in any other toolkit. And that tree of widgets and containers and scrollable lists and checkboxes and so on are easily mapped to semantic information. So what you want out of accessibility support on a platform such as, for example, Android, which is the one I've been working on, is to map something that is displayed on the screen in a way that can be accessible for people with sight impairments. So if they can't read the screen or see the screen, if they are completely blind, for example, they want an Android TalkBack. In the example of Android, there's a TalkBack application that can read the screen aloud for you. And to do that, it needs the widget tree or the description of all the widgets that appear on in a screen right now. And they also need some way, in Android's case, you can use the finger to sort of swipe across the screen and get a sense of what is below your finger, because the TalkBack application will tell you either the content of what is below your finger or the intention and or purpose of, for example, a button or a checkbox and so on. And to do that again, you need to describe the tree of widgets to TalkBack, which is the Android's way of Android's accessibility API, which then TalkBack uses. Okay, so but in Gio, you don't have this tree. It's implicit in the way you run through your widgets and your labels and your buttons and so on, and draw them as you reach them in the progress, as you progress through the frame, the draw function or methods, or the frame method on your main application object and so on. So the structure of your widget tree is completely, in Gio, is completely up to you as an application developer, but that then doesn't reveal any structure information, natural structure information that we can use for TalkBack. So what I've been working on is it's adding heuristics for mapping objects that you draw or widgets that you register in Gio to the retained mode tree representation that Android expects. And I've done that mostly through content hashing. So if you have two labels on the screen with the same content, it maps to the same identity in a sort of a virtual tree representation of your Gio user interface. And I use the clip instructions, the clip operations, so where you cut out rectangles or paths for text and so on. I use the structure of those to mimic a tree structure for accessibility on Android, and that has worked out pretty well, I'd say, because there's widgets only need a little bit of extra information in order for Gio to present enough information to TalkBack that it can be used successfully by a sight-impaired person. So that means that the principle, or let's say the API that you as a widget developer or you as an application developer needs to support is very little. I'll just try and semantic here. So I'll just try and look it up. The actual. I'll find it. I'll find it in a moment. So what you need to do is only adding the extra information that you can't extract itself. And an example of that would be the purpose or functionality of a widget that does not have a textual description. So if you have a button with text on it that describes whatever the button will achieve, then Gio will automatically present that to accessibility APIs, and you don't need to do anything extra. But for example, if you have a checkbox without an attached label, you need to some way to describe what does it do in textual terms that can be read out loud. And that's what package semantic is for. And as you can see, it's very lightweight because only a little bit of extra information is required. And most of this information is added for the core widgets. So the core toggle or switch already have this as an extra argument to its constructor. So really what you need to do when you add accessibility to your application is only consider the custom widgets that you have, and only consider it if there's no textual or label or something else added as part of that widget that can adequately describe the widget. So in summary, it's pretty much automatic, and especially for the core widgets, the Gio core widgets. So that's mostly what I've been working on for the past month or so. And as for upcoming work, I'm going to work on IME, better Android support, better software keyboard support on Android and Windows, and very likely Mac OS. And that work is paid for by Plato, which is very nice because it's been, I think the bug report for it, or the bug reports for it have been open for quite some time, maybe even years. I think it's what was one of the first, at least among the first bug reports that I received on Gio, that the Android software keyboard didn't work ideally. Let's just say that for Gio applications. So thank you to Plato for to get that moving. And in other news, I've previous to the accessibility work, I've been working on the compute renderer, which is the new and more fancy, and in some cases faster renderer than, at least easier to add new features to, rendered for Gio. But that has, but it also has kind of stalled because it didn't work well on iPhone, it didn't work well on Mac OS, and there was several, I wouldn't just say older, but just low spec Android phones where support was simply inadequate, or there were too many driver bugs to get it to run in without corruption or crashing. And the good news is that all this compute shader work, compute render work, most of the meat of the work is actually done by a very brilliant Rustation Rav and his piet-gpu. I won't look it up right now, but it's his piet-gpu project, which is some of that, the driver of it, the sort of the connection between the CPU and the GPU is written in Rust, but all his GPU related work that we use is written in GLSL, which is the portable language for programming GPUs, and that we more or less just import all his work for the GPU in Gio to make the compute renderer. And Rav has actually been working on portability and has found some, I won't even call it under spec, but he's found some limitations in the metal API, the Metal GPU API, and that's the Metal is what we use on macOS and iOS. And he's rewritten parts of his work in a simpler but less performant way that actually works on macOS and iPhone. So that's very, very encouraging in the sense that when he completes that work, I plan to re-import and adjust our compute renderer to match, and hopefully we will then reach a point where it will work in general on all platforms. He's also working on better Windows compatibility where similar problems exist. So he's actually doing much of the heavy lifting right now without him. He knows about Gio, of course, but without him actually meaning to. So I think that's a very exciting update that we may soon see much better, much improved compatibility across the board for the compute renderer. And I hope that some of that work will also make some of the low spec phones, Android phones, work as well. He hasn't tested it, and I don't know for sure, but that's very likely that simpler compute shaders, depending on less advanced features, will also make it work on some of those phones. So, and if we get wide enough support, we may even be able to enable the compute renderer by default, which would be a major milestone in getting to be the. My ultimate goal is, of course, to throw out the old renderer and only have one renderer for Gio. So I think that's at least to me, that's very exciting, because that's sort of clears all these obstacles. I had lost some of my faith in GPUs at some point, and I believe I can say that RAV has brought some of that faith back by actually identifying, actually digging into what exactly caused these portability and compatibility problems. So yeah, that's it for now.
Okay. Well, for my part, I've been working on complex text handling, and it is still ongoing. I'm mostly working on the Gio Core editor widget and trying to teach it that one rune of Unicode data does not correspond to one glyph. I'm really hoping I can have patches out this month that kind of are a first pass at that. But I'm not sure when yet, because there's many little bugs still. But that's pretty much it for me. I also did the other day merge a new example for how to use rich text to implement a markdown previewer. So you can find that in the example repo. I'm going to turn things over to Clayton now.
Hello, can you hear me? Awesome. My name is Clayton Craft. I'm one of the core developers for postmarketOS, and let's see if my screen sharing will work this time. Come on. Anything?
I can see it's working.
Awesome. Cool. So I'm working with a group of folks on a distribution, a Linux distribution for mobile phones, with the goal of basically extending the life of a number of Android phones, which manufacturers have decided to no longer update. We're also targeting this new generation of native Linux phones, like the Librem 5 and the Pine phone, and kind of got started a while back using the old Nokia N900 from like 12 years ago or so. This distribution is based on Alpine Linux, which is a distro that's really common for like containers because of its really small install base size. And currently using this distribution and other similar distributions, like there's one based on Debian called Mobian. There's another one, actually Manjaro, which is kind of a common or well-known Arch Linux based distribution also supports mobile phones. These distributions are a little rough to use. They're kind of hard to install. They're kind of hard to poke around with at this time. So there's a lot of effort to try to make them easier to use for normal folks, instead of just like your elite Linux enthusiasts that are probably most interested in using this on their phone at the moment. So yeah, one of the problems is that it's not super easy to install our distribution onto existing phones, whether it's an old Android phone or one of these native Linux phones. And so I've been working on a desktop installer for basically doing this. It tries to automate downloading images and flashing images onto supported devices. The target audience is really just people who don't have any experience using the Linux command line or anything like that. And so just make it easy for them to grab the latest version of our distribution or others. It's called Yachtlip because naming is hard. And also it was a fun little acronym for Year of the Linux Phone, which is there's this pretty common meme where every year we say this year is the year of the Linux desktop. And so I'm trying to make this year the year of the Linux phone. And by having a desktop installer, it's kind of, one path forward towards world domination. The goal is to make it cross-platform, which is a really important point I'll hit on in a second. But right now it really works on Linux because that's what I'm using and that's what most people in this project are using. But the goal is to support Windows and maybe Mac OS later on. I don't think any of us actually have a Mac for testing this out, so we might have to get one first in order to do the development work for that. And the source code for this program is all public and free and licensed under GPL3, I believe. So why Gio? And that's probably what you guys are most interested in. These are some of the reasons I chose to use this graphics library over some of the other ones I found for Go. Right off the bat, I've only been using Go for about 6 months. So I come from a pretty long career, if you will, of using Python and C. So a lot of things I was looking for in Gio kind of stem from my past experiences using Python and other graphics libraries that try to hitch a ride on Python, if you will. The first important point for Gio that really caught my eye was it's cross-platform and it's super easy to cross-compile. Like so easy that I was able to just like take a very simple hello world that just opened a window, cross-compile it on my Linux system targeting Windows, and was able to run it using Wine, which is a compatibility layer on Linux for running Windows applications. And it just worked. And I threw it in a Windows VM and it just worked. I took some examples from the Gio Kitchen project because I was thinking like, oh, these seem to be a little more complicated. Like maybe they're going to be harder to cross-compile. And didn't have any problems at all cross-compiling those and doing the same experiment. So I was like, this is perfect because I didn't want to come up with this crazy build system in order to try to support Windows, for instance. Some of the other graphics libraries I looked at were not so easy to cross-compile. And so that was a big downer for using those. Another interesting bit was because I may not get this exactly right describing it, but the interface that Gio uses just feels like it's just another Go library and not a library that's native to some other language that's kind of bolted on. And some of this kind of stems from my experiences using other graphics libraries on Python, where like using the Qt Python stuff or the piet-gpu stuff, it very much feels like it's just a C or C++ library that's bolted onto this language you're using. And that's kind of what these other like Go GTK and stuff felt like when I looked at them. So I didn't really want to go down that dark path of trying to use these libraries that weren't really meant to run in Go and using Goisms and stuff like that, whatever the right term is for that. They just didn't feel like they belonged in the language. And so the fact that Gio kind of did was also a major benefit that I saw in choosing it. And then the last bit was very much selfish and personal. I just wanted to try out intermediate mode graphics because I have only really ever used things like GTK and Qt in the past. And so it just seemed interesting. I'd heard of IMGUI in other projects and haven't really played with it or had an excuse to. So this was just an excuse to give that a try. Okay, so live demo time, which let's see if the demo gods are in my favor today. All right, so I'm not sure if this is exactly visible. There's no window decorations because I'm using a tiling window manager, so that's what you get with that. Yeah, so the idea is that this application can actually support other mobile Linux distributions. And I don't know if you noticed, I used a tag when I compiled it and specified the distro at the top. The idea is you would be able to build this application and choose the distribution you want to support at build time. So the folks using Mobian, for instance, would be able to build a Mobian version. And then the application would pull in branding and stuff for that distribution. So any of these distros can go and basically just like build a desktop installer by just, adding a logo and some text to the project. And then there's some backend stuff for that tells the application where to get images for the distro, how to determine what supported devices are and whatnot. But this is the first screen at the moment that a user would see. And eventually this will list all of the devices supported by the particular distribution. At the moment, I just have 3 because these are 3 that I just happen to own, and it's easy to test with stuff you actually have in hand. I have a nice little search box where you can search for doesn't make a lot of sense now, but later when there's a lot more, it would hopefully be easier. You can't really see it now because I think the smallest window size is still too big for this, but this is a grid wrap which will overflow to the next line and implement scrolling, and so that's kind of nice. One of the things that we try to target with doing mobile applications is make the UI somewhat dynamic or adaptive to the screen size. And so like for instance, sometimes a mobile phone has a really short width, and so you want the UI components to kind of flow in a way that makes everything fit on the screen and not cut off items and stuff like that. I found that Gio doesn't have a lot of support for doing that, but the grid wrap, which seemed to be implemented just right when I was looking for it, very nicely does that. And so I was able to kind of get that going. So next screen is you just pick the phone you have, and then the distribution will list the versions that are supported. These are the 2 kind of main versions of postmarketOS. There's Edge, which is like the rolling release distribution, and then there's stable releases, which are more traditional Linux distributions where you have one major release and then you have security updates over time. So that's for folks that don't like living on the edge, so to speak. And then there's a number of user interfaces that are supported in the distro, and so they are shown here on this next screen. And we'll just choose one here. And let's see here. Oh, actually, maybe I can get the overflow thing to work if I go to this screen, because I think these elements are a little bit bigger. Yeah, okay. So you see how it just jumped down, and you can... That's kind of nice, I think, especially since that's something we strive for when making mobile applications. And even though this is a desktop application, I think it's still nice to do that instead of just cut off elements and stuff. Okay, so this actually for Linux is using UDisk and Polkit for detecting drives that are plugged in, and it tries to pick out which drives are actually removable, so it's not trying to flash like your root hard drive or anything like that, which would be a bad time if we're to succeed doing that. And I'd actually already downloaded this image, so we didn't get to see that fun little counter go. But anyways, the application now will just like extract this big, I think it's like 4 gigabytes or something like that, the OS image, and then it will write it to the flash drive. Or in this case, it's an SD card, because I picked the Pine phone, so it can actually boot from an SD card, and it'll flash that. And then the expectation is the user takes the SD card out, puts it in their phone, and then can boot up into the distro and complete the installation process that way. Right now, it only supports the Pine phone and only supports flashing to SD cards. If you have an Android phone and have done any sort of like flashing of ROMs and stuff, you'll know that that won't work. You have to use fastboot, or on some devices like Samsung, there's OEM specific tools like Heimdall and other things like that. That's kind of a future goal, is to support these other tools for flashing images. And so then, yeah, basically it would all just be hidden for the user, and they would just have like a different set of steps for like getting their phone into fastboot mode and then completing the flashing that way. But at the moment, it's just going to flash this SD card I have plugged in eventually when it extracts this image, and then the user would be up and running. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have implemented at the moment. Yeah, it's once I'm working with folks that are part of the Mobian project to get their distribution added in here. And then, yeah, once I add support for flashing other devices, I think it'll be a pretty nice way to flash our distribution onto these phones, so people can just like use them quite easily, hopefully. Yeah, that's pretty much all I had. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but are there any questions or comments?
You're fine on
Okay.
time. This is slick. High level question for you. I mean, what were the biggest obstacles when you were trying to build this, especially with respect to like, what was the hardest for you to achieve with Gio?
As somebody who is not very familiar with Go, because like I said, I just really started using it about 6 months ago. Probably the hardest thing for me to wrap my head around was the use of anonymous functions in a lot of the Go examples, and how, oh, there's Polkit asking me for my password. Let's see here. Maybe this will actually. Okay, there we go. It's right into the SD card. Yeah, probably the biggest problem was just like reading the examples and seeing a lot of these like nested anonymous functions and trying to sort out like what exactly is going on. And then also like when things broke, trying to unwrap that or unroll it and figure out where things are going wrong. And so it seems like I spent a lot of time trying to basically avoid doing that, like doing too many levels of anonymous functions when doing layouts and things like that. So, but I will say, like, once it finally clicked, it really didn't become a problem anymore. But that was kind of just like the first thing I remember banging my head on the wall, trying to figure out. And beyond that, there was like some of the input handling was a little weird just because I wasn't used to it. But I will say, like, the kitchen, the Gio kitchen project, and actually a lot of projects that you've pointed me to, Chris, have helped a lot in just showing me how to accomplish certain things. And I've been able to like follow them because the code was pretty well written, that I could figure out what was going on and how I might apply it to my own project. And that's been hugely helpful, I think, having good public examples of how to use the API. Because I'm more of like a visual learner, where I could read documentation and like kind of understand it, but I really like to see examples of how it's used to try to get a better understanding of how it could be applied. And so that's been super helpful.
Awesome. Anyone else have questions? Okay. Well, does it do something fancy when we get to 100%?
We could see, actually, and then I could try to boot it too if you want to see what happens, because I haven't tried this in a couple weeks, and I'm not sure if the image I picked will even boot on the Pine phone, but we'll see.
I see Elias unmuted.
Do you run on some of these devices when you have postmarketOS installed?
I haven't tried, but it should, because they're just running Mesa, and all of the well, not all of them, but most of the devices that we actively use have pretty decent OpenGL drivers in Mesa, and some of them have like, I don't think Vulkan's very well supported, so the new compute thing using Vulkan might not work very well. But that's a good question. I haven't actually tried to build any, and that's kind of like another reason I wanted to use this was because Go is my new favorite language, and having a graphics library like this that I could rely on will just give me another excuse to like start trying to write mobile applications that use it on these phones. And so I'm gonna try it at some point when I have some time and this thing is kind of wrapped up. But that was kind of the like long-term goal, is to have some tools that I could use to write better applications, because right now I'm using like Python and GTK, and it's super slow and janky, and it's just not great on these slower devices. So having something that can be more performant, and yeah, like I mentioned earlier, having the having some adaptiveness in UI elements and layouts is really important when the screen size is kind of small and dynamic. So that's something that I'll probably like run into some more edge cases where that might be a problem on Gio, because it seems like it wasn't really targeted, and that's fine just because it's kind of this weird use case. But I expect there to be some more things to figure out when I try to make UI elements fit on super small screen widths.
Well, immediate mode helps a lot when you're trying to build responsive UI, because nothing has kind of retained widths that need to be constantly recalculated. But you're right that there aren't a bunch of layout types out of the box that implement things like switching from horizontal to vertical layout depending on available real estate or something like that, or a column layout system, like that sort of thing. Definitely we could stand to build.
Yeah, and the grid wrap, I think is what it's called, actually gets me pretty far. Once I figured out how to use that thing, that's kind of the biggest problem, I think, is just automatic wrapping and then the scrolling enabling stuff. So I created like a little simple widget thing that kind of uses those two things together to make the scrollable area, I forgot what it's called, and then the grid wrap that I reuse a lot in the application. And I can see myself using it quite a bit if I were to write a mobile application, for instance, because it just sort of like smashes everything below so that it can fit. Let's see if this thing boots. Let's see, I don't know if you can see that or not. There we go. Yeah, cool. So it works.
We can see it, but I believe you.
Oh, okay. I don't know if you can see my camera.
If you stop your screen share,
oh, sorry.
See your camera.
I enabled the camera and then forgot to stop the screen share. But it's
I still see your screen for some reason. I don't know.
But let me try to re-enable my camera. Maybe that'll.
Maybe Jitsy's confused. Well, I'll take your word for it.
All right.
did in fact install. Well, thanks, Clayton. That's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the time, and thank you for the awesome library, because it's great. I was really not looking forward to trying to make GTK work or whatever in this thing, and so it's nice to have alternatives.
And if you do run into problems, unforeseen problems, performance problems, or anything, feel free to bring it up on the mailing list or issue track or something.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think many people have actually tried running Gio on Linux on top of phones, and I get the sense that the OpenGL drivers are probably of high quality, but I don't think as many features have been implemented. So there could be fallbacks to the slow paths in some of Gio's renderers. I did fix something recently where before Gio would require native sRGB support in the OpenGL driver, which was blocking, I think it was the Librem 5 for a long time. And I don't know if the drivers have since been updated to do sRGB natively or not. But in any case, there may be some showstoppers that make it not run at all, and there may be very likely something that will make performance not great at all. But it's also very likely that that any performance problems can be fixed relatively easy. So please don't give up if it doesn't work right away out of the box as you would expect.
Yeah, I think a lot of the drivers are not even like conformant for any OpenGL version, as far as I know. So yeah, you're right. I think they're there, and they generally work for a lot of the things we've thrown at them. But yeah, if you're using like some maybe lesser used extensions or whatever, it might be a problem. And yeah, I'll definitely let you know if there's like performance or other weirdness going on that I find when I get to that point.
It could also be input, of course. I don't think many people test the touch input support in Wayland, for example, which is which is what I expect would be the interface for the touch screen on in postmarketOS. Or it could be that is even more likely. There could be a problem with the software keyboard on postmarketOS, because I expect that to be what Wayland and its IME protocol, and I don't think that's even implemented in Gio. So you could run into the problem that, for example, the keyboard doesn't work at all, but that should definitely not stop you.
Yeah, Gio's not building, or I guess by default it's not a native Wayland client, right? It's running through X Wayland.
It's actually both, but it tries the X11 backend first, because we lack support for client-side window decorations on Wayland. Okay,
I see. So which like isn't a problem on phones, but yeah, I can see how that would be a problem on desktop.
But if you use the no X11 tag, you will compile your Gio program without X11 support.
Yeah, Chris mentioned that to me yesterday, and I haven't tried it, but yeah, I'm wondering if it does actually run through X Wayland, if the keyboard stuff would just work, because it would just be kind of going through X Wayland or something. I don't know how that works, but yeah.
Exciting to find out. But in any case, if you run into problems, I don't think anyone has actually done this before, or maybe only a few people. So if you run into problems, feel free to ask away and file issues.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Good.
Okay. So now we're going to turn things over to our next speaker. I got to be honest, I don't know the correct pronunciation for your name. Can you help me out? Oh, I don't hear you now. I think you're muted in Jitsi. Sorry.
Yeah, I pressed the M key, but it was in the wrong application. Yes, my name is Jan Kåre Vatne from Norway.
All right. Well, Jan, take it away.
Yes, I feel a bit of an outsider here because I'm quite new to both open source programming and Gio. But I'm quite old in the game, and I've been programming for quite a lot of years. I started out with a basic and a teletype, and advanced to punched cards on the university. So I've really been from the start. But I got my first personal computer in 1980, and that's quite early. In fact, before the IBM made the PC. It was an Intel development system with 200 kilobytes of floppy disks. There's been some progress since that time. Actually, I mostly do hardware electronics designs, and programming is just part of the job because everything today uses microprocessors. So I've been programming microprocessors for a long time. I discovered Gio not a long time ago because a few years ago I made a big application using Nuclear, which is a C library that's also an immediate mode. But it was just a C library and mapped to Go, and it was horrible. So I've been looking for something better. I've tried Fine, which I didn't like very much. And then I found Gio, which is quite interesting. And actually, I ran into exactly the same problems that Clayton mentioned at the end of his presentation. This heavy use of anonymous functions or lambda constructs, it's really difficult to understand and really difficult to debug. So I set out making a version that's easier to use. It was perhaps a bit ambitious, and actually it breaks with a lot of conventions that you use, which I didn't know at the time when I started. It's no longer pure immediate code because I build a widget tree. And I think I break other conventions that you use also, but that doesn't matter for me because I just want something that's simple to use to build screens, and I'm almost only using desktop Windows applications. That's what I need, and that's what I'm targeting. One of the things that I missed very much from Gio was the ability to use keyboard only. There is currently no support for tabbing between the widgets. So in order to get that functionality, I had to build a structure of widgets that I can use to determine which is the previous widget and which is the next. But actually now, after working some time with it, I have found that it is in fact possible to use tabbing without building this tree that I do. You just have to store the previous widget drawn, and then you can tab back to it, set the focus. But anyway, this widget library that I build is very much simpler, and I will try to show an example here. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Yeah, okay. There is an example from the kitchen code to draw a flat button. And it's, I don't know, 12 lines. And in my library, it's just one line. you write, like you see here, text button. And one of the things that I use is have a use of optional parameters. So here I add the color red and a handler on click, which of course is not what Gio normally uses. I have discovered that callbacks are not what we should use, but I do it anyway. And it makes for very simple code when you are building applications. Here are some examples of optional parameters: a callback handler and padding, and a hint or a tooltip, which is also called, color and text styling. One thing I thought of when I heard Elias is that when you're building applications for blind, also people not seeing, what you want to read up is just this tooltip or hint. So if you could add that to all widgets, that would be a nice way to, or perhaps that's what you have done, I don't know. But what I do with this hint is to show it when you hover over a widget for a few seconds, and it pops up. I'll show you later on. But this could also be used for reading out an explanation of what the widget is doing. Another thing that I did was to extend the theme, because I don't want hard-coded sizes. I want everything to scale with the form size. So I use heavy use of sizes that are relative to the text size. So and the theme is contains a lot of things. In fact, it contains most of the things for each widget. But all of it is based on a palette, like the material design here. Here is from the generation of the theme. For tooltip, for example, I have the default settings for corner radius and the width and the background and things like that. Because I have used Java on Android, and I've used CSS code, and both of them have the same problem, that it's almost impossible to determine where the colors or features are coming from. There is an endless nesting of default values. So I put everything in one place, so it's easy to find it and easy to change it. Because this theme, you can change each of those things when you start an application. So here is, yeah, you hear me some, the sound is not synchronized. This is a recording. I'm now showing the dynamic resizing of the window, and everything scales. And I have buttons to maximize and center the application, and changing font sizes from small to big. And now I'm showing the tabbing from widget to widget. And also you can tab from button to button. All the clickable widgets have tab functions. And now you see the tooltip or hint that pops up automatically. And this is a demonstration of my first try on a grid. This is not the one that's going to Gio, but it's another one. It's the grid can have arbitrary widgets, and this is a demonstration of the drop-down lists. Yeah, I think that was everything. Yes, I could show you an actual implementation of it, or the presentation, but I don't know if that's so interesting.
We got a few minutes if you have something you would like to show. Also, if anyone has questions about what we've already seen, now would be a good time.
Yes, I think we can take some questions if anybody has any.
I don't have a question, just a comment. I really like the hinting, the pop-up you have when hovering over elements, and I really like the drop-down list thing as well. I was trying to make one of those early on when I was looking at Gio and failed horribly, but yours looks really nice. I'd like to see that in a way that could be reused by other folks too.
Yes, you can reuse this. With all of these widgets are available on GitHub.
Nice.
Yes, some of these things, like the Dropbox, could perhaps be implemented in the main Gio repo.
Yes, please.
We have primitives for some of this stuff that are not pre-assembled. And it would be really good to build some higher level stuff. For instance, the flat button that you demonstrated earlier, yeah, it does require 4 levels of nesting and 12 lines to write it. But we could just as easily expose a constructor and a type that did that. And the tooltip stuff, we have a tooltip implementation in the component repo in X, but by default, you have to kind of opt in to using tooltips on your other widgets. They just kind of wrap another widget. And we could do more to make that easier.
Yes, of course. Because this library that I have made, I just copied everything I could find. I've copied from all of those example repos. So most of it is not my code. I just copied it and made some higher level interfaces to make it easier to use. And also I fixed a lot of things that I didn't like and which, yeah, I thought was the wrong way to do it. But most of the code is just copied.
Elias,
you had something else?
So with respect to the semantic information from for blind users or sight impaired users, I believe, and I tested that if you just have the hint written as a label inside your editor or whatever text box you want, it should automatically be used as the description or as the label for that text box. If you want the hint to be associated with the text box or button or whatever as a description, you use package semantics description op with that description, and that description will then be attached to the nearest clipping area that is active, the most recent clipping area that is active, which is usually, for example, for a button, it's the rounded rect clipping. For a text box, it's the rectangular clipping for the entire text content and so on.
Yes, my hints are just a label. Yes.
but they are not. They're probably not directly connected to the button in the sense that you defer them. I would guess.
What do I do?
Or do you just draw them on top of the button?
I draw them as part of the widget. Yes.
Okay. Then they may or may not be automatically extracted to use by the accessibility APIs. But if they are not used, if the hint is not, the tooltip is not used, you can manually add that description to your widget with that description on. I wanted to ask you another thing. You mentioned that you program microcontrollers for a living, or at least part of your living. Have you ever used TinyGo for anything?
No, I've checked it out, but it was not available for the processors that I do use most. Yeah, I use microchip mostly.
Okay.
But today it's mostly microchip, and I don't think there was implementation for microchip processors.
Okay.
But it would be very nice. I like Go very much. I do.
Because I happen to be playing around with this device, which is an STM F469 discovery board, which has a very, it's a neat little M4, Cortex M4 ARM processor, 32-bit. It has a built-in TFT panel, LCD panel, which is touch sensitive. And it runs TinyGo pretty well. And I'm looking towards doing something with GU for the user interface on that device. So I just wanted to know if you had any experience in that area.
I have used that kind of processors, not exactly that one, but the other ones.
Okay.
It was a very nice board. Could you repeat the name of it? Or perhaps write it in the...
I'll just write it as the STM32F469. It's a very nice one. It has built-in programming, debugger and Flash programmer. And it has a USB interface. It has built-in sound, LEDs, SD card reader. What else is there? Audio output, and of course the general purpose I/O ports. I think that's about it. And I think it's about, is it $50 or something for this board? $50 or $60.
Yes, I've implemented quite a few user interfaces of that kind with a small LCD screen.
Mm-hmm.
And this one should fit that use very well.
I think one of the things that make it even viable to do, I don't think whether it is a good idea or not, but it is the fact that I believe this chip, the ARM Cortex M4, has a built-in FPU, so it can do floating point calculations. And since GU is very much based on floats, I think, I would expect that a chip without native floating point support would be too slow to use.
Yes.
A T1.
I agree.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? gio-v is very impressive. I put a link to it in the chat.
Yes, just a comment. It's very impressive. Thank you very much for this work and demonstration. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's going to conclude the recorded portion of this meeting. Let me stop the recording.